This show is brought to you by HostBaby.com, web hosting for musicians.
Step right up, son. I'm going to make you a star. That's right. That's my really bad impression of a booking agent. And on this episode of Music Marketing Monday, number 59, we'll talk about how to work with booking agents. There's no cigar needed. That's what's in store. Buckle up. Let's go.
Information, inspiration, motivation for the modern musicpreneur.
Time to start your week right.
Here it comes. Music Marketing Monday with your host, Bob Baker,
Mr. Buzz Factor,
and Billy Gryzak.
The Music Marketing Mind.
Ready? Are you sure?
Set.
Here it comes. Swing, baby.
DIY means you do everything yourself. You do all the bookings, you do all the taxes, you do all the guitar tuning, the fixing, the PA setting up, the sound, the dishes. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe DIY just means like, you oversee, you're in charge. Maybe you don't have to do all the bookings yourself. Well, that's something we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the wonderful world of booking agents here with me, Billy Gryzak, the full-time working musician. And that guy over there in the corner putting his cigar out is
Bob Baker, the full-time author. Actually, I'm a little distracted because I'm trying to hold up the weight of all the hats that I'm wearing. DIY, all that, you got to do a little bit of everything. But that is so true that you bring that up because, even though DIY stands for do it yourself, we're all about the independent movement. Yeah, you literally don't have to do everything yourself. And quite often you can. I mean, I know that you actively book a lot of your own gigs, but sometimes you have to go through the established agencies and then the specific people who are agents at those agencies. And I have a feeling that with your renewed energy and your full-time musician status, Billy, that you have a little bit of experience in this area.
Oh, goodness gracious, you have no idea. Let me tell you, man. But I'd like to thank all these wonderful booking agents and all of the other buyers of talent and clubs of venues for check this out, man, between the middle of May and the beginning of September, I have a total of maybe 12 days off where I'm not actually getting paid to play music.
I think you have earned the title of full-time working musician.
I think I've earned the title of overtime working musician.
Overtime, overworked and underpaid. So should we give credit for where the idea for this episode?
Absolutely. So over here at the Full-Time Working Musician Group on Facebook, formerly Music Marketing Mind, one of our buddies, Brandon Gibbons, wrote a short little, well, not that short, 3-4 paragraphs on Facebook. Basically, that's a Facebook novella, I think. And he asked us, what our thoughts were on booking agents. And we're going to kind of reference that during the show, but we'd like to thank Brandon. We'd also like to thank Jason, Alex for chiming in with some ideas as well. So, we're going to be getting back to doing our listener and fan-driven ideas for the next several shows. I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. Me too. So what's the first thing that people need to know about working with booking agents? And I guess here's a question too. At what point do you try to deal with the venue directly? And at what point do you go through an agent? What's the criteria? How do you know? So let's just start there.
Right. Well, actually, let's go a little bit before that. Let's get down to the basics of things. What is a booking agent? Okay, just for those of you that don't know. I mean, there's bookers, there's managers, there's your girlfriend gets you a gig. There's all different things. But a booking agent typically is a professional person that has a relationship with venues. Those venues could be weddings, they could be concerts, they could be nightclubs, casinos, whatever. So not all agents are created equal. There's all different types of booking agents, okay? So one of the first things you need to do is identify who is the best agent for you. What is the right fit? What do they do? What don't they do? You know what I mean? And typically for their time, they're compensated. And compensation used to be a standard of 10%. It's kind of going to a more typical 15%, in some cases 20, which is what I pay one of my agents in particular who deals strictly with casinos. And in one case, and I know everybody's going to cringe when they hear this, I did work with one agent for 1 year that took 30%, and that's off the top before my expenses and everything. However, I will say that particular agent was such a specialized agent that I ended up getting, ready for this, 423 shows in 1 year. I would stack them up and do many shows in one day. Yeah, that was my big day, and I flew everywhere. So, needless to say, even with paying 30%, I was making more than enough money to cover the expenses. So that's right. So you need to decide, what are these people doing for you? Now, typically, when you work with an agent also, it comes with an agreement. This is where some bands might not know how to act ethically, and I'm hoping you learn from this episode. Typically speaking, if an agent, let's say, calls you, says, I'd like you to go play Joe's Bar, and you go play Joe's Bar, if it's in the contract, or even if it's not in the contract, there's usually an understanding that you have a year before you can go in there and book Joe's Bar directly, because you would not have gotten that job at Joe's Bar without them. Okay, yeah. They introduced you, so now you are stuck calling them whenever you want to play Joe's Bar. You don't call Joe's Bar. That's a breach of etiquette. That's also could be a breach of contract. That could be a legal thing. So you have to consider that as well. Do you want to be locked into those types of relationships?
So another question that comes up, do any booking agents require like exclusivity, like all your gigs need to be booked through them, or is it more on a venue by venue basis now, with most of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd love to hear from people in other parts of the country, but in the 80s and going into the 90s, so like say the 80s, 90s, agents really were into getting exclusives. They wanted to only book one band. Now, remember, too, there was a lot more work. So you could do that. This agent had 10, 20 bands. This agent had 10, 20 bands. Now it's more like there's different agents that have relationships with venues, and they're all working out of the same pool of musicians now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a pool of musicians, and you have these guys that are kind of like playing middleman, trying to match up your bands with their relationships with the venues that they represent. So exclusive, sometimes you'll get an agent that does that, but I would be extremely... Well, I wouldn't sign an exclusive at all unless there's guarantees and out clauses. In other words, let's say if I'm a full-time musician and let's say I need to make $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month, whatever it is, to pay my bills, my rent, my mortgage, feed my kids, that agent has to guarantee me that they're going to be giving me that much money, or it's a breach of contract. You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be a lawyer. I only play a lawyer on this podcast. But so any legal advice here, you should probably talk to a real lawyer.
Billy Gryzak, Esquire.
Yeah. So you need to talk to a real lawyer. This is just from my 40 plus years of experience dealing with this crap. You know what I mean? So there you go.
So it's important to point out, as you did earlier, that that in case someone has a mistaken identity or mistaken impression, booking agents just don't work with venues. As you said, you've used them to get into casinos, private functions. And I know I used to do stand-up comedy. It's been many years since I did that, but I know there was an agency.
Gee whiz, Bob! I thought you did stand-up comedy every Monday here.
No, yeah, once a week I do that. I'm actually sitting down here, but.
Sit down comedy. I'm sorry, Bob. I apologize.
No, that's okay. But I would get work, and it's a little unusual. Yeah, usually you don't go through an agent. Well, I guess you do to go to a comedy club. But anyway, this agency would call me whenever like a company would call them and go, we want to hire a comic, and so they would call me and say, "Are you available? Can you do it for this amount?" Blah blah blah. So I think agents work that same. Businesses, companies, whatever, call them. They book what do you call it? Specialized venues and events and things that you maybe wouldn't even think of, or would not have access to otherwise.
Right. Like, for instance, like in my area, remember, I'm in the middle of nowhere here, I mean, I used to live on the East Coast, and there was a lot more going on there, lots of different types of agents. But even here, for what I do, there's one agent that I work with that specializes primarily, and also territories too. Like one agent, I live in Wisconsin, but his territories that he primarily books are Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and it's mostly casinos. And so that's the work I get from that agent. There's another agency I deal with that primarily books northeastern Wisconsin. They do bars and nightclubs and things like that. Now, the one thing about both of these agents that you should probably know is they're primarily booking cover bands. Okay, there's another agency that just does weddings. That's all they do. They book people for weddings. There's another one here that does more like supper clubs and stuff. Then there's the one that does original acts, and they do big names. They'll bring in like, Lita Ford and Bret Michaels and stuff. Then they're looking for supporting acts. So just in my area, there's probably, maybe somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen different agents that do different things. And then what I try to do is I try to match up, what they need and see if what they need is what I can offer them. Because remember what we always say, kids, what we always say is it's not about what they're going to do for you. Because if you're expecting an agent to do something for you, you might as well just not even bother. It's what can you do for them? In other words, the first thing when I call an agent, I say, hey, so you book bands? Yeah, okay, great. What kind of bands do you book? What are you looking for? What do you need? And if I have something that fits their needs, then I say, well, hey, maybe I can help you. And then I develop a relationship based on that instead of saying, hey, can you help me? Can you get me a gig? What can you do for me? You know what I mean? So that's been my approach with agents. It's been very successful. You know what I mean? I can't say that I've come across any agencies lately in the last few years that's a one-stop shop that can do it all for you. I think you're still going to need to do your own bookings. You're going to have to, call some venues, do the Craigslist thing like we talked about, email campaigns, whatever. And so that's something to consider. Now, when do you use an agent, right? We were going to talk about that first.
Yeah, versus going direct with the venue. Yeah.
Right. Well, typically, from my standpoint, if it's local, I will try to book it myself first if it's local. But what a lot of times what will happen is you'll say, hi, I'd like to book my show at your place. And they say, well, we use XYZ agency. Well, now you know what you got to do. It's pretty cut and dry. Also, and you probably know about this because you used to have an entertainment paper, Bob.
Yes.
We have entertainment papers here, and I don't know about the one you had, but this one basically just shows where all the bands are playing. And so after a while, once you get to know which bands are kind of represented by agents, you sort of kind of know which bars are using those agencies. Does that make sense as well?
Right. You assume that they're getting in, through the agent. My former newspaper had the calendar section and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So my first thing, if it's local, I always try to book it myself. If I can't get it myself, then I'll use the agent. Or if I know that there's an agent that's got a lock or they've got a room wrapped up, Now, typically I don't book tours on my own. Typically. Although I just did book a bunch of Wyoming dates on my own, but that's neither here nor there. Typically, if I want to go somewhere, I will call agents that I know that book in those regions, okay? Way back in the late 80s is when I actually started this whole touring agent thing, and I decided I wanted to go to Canada. I don't know why. I just decided I wanted to go to Canada. So I asked around and said to my friends, does anybody know any agents that book Canada? So I got a phone number for an agency in Regina, and they were interested in having our band, and they booked us across Canada for like, I don't know, about a couple of months. But I was in New Jersey, so then I had to find another agency that booked gigs between New Jersey and Minnesota, so I could book some routing dates so I could get to Canada. You know what I mean? And I had to find another agency down by, Washington so I could book some gigs working my way back. So sometimes you have to chain them together. And again, it's just finding the needs. And I got to tell you, back when I was originally doing this, it was tough finding agents because it was almost like who knows who knows what, and everybody guarded their information. Now, man, the other day I was just doing searches for booking agents on the internet. Man, they drop like flies on Google. It's crazy how many agencies there are out there.
Thank God for Google. I know one thing that Brandon writes here that I think is probably worth pointing out here is he's talking about how his band is starting to gain momentum and gain traction, starting to make some money. And he says to the point here where I feel I have the, quote, proof of concept and a pie big enough that some people might like a piece. And that's really interesting because I hear this with managers. There's a lot of bands and artists that are struggling and they want a manager. And basically the best advice that I and other people have given is that you really don't attract a manager until you have something to manage, and so is that the same thing with booking agents?
No, not really. If you have a band that it fits their bill, if it's what